The small town of Meadowbrook, Ohio, falls into a silence so complete in the autumn twilight that time itself seems to stand still. In this conservative Midwestern community, Winston Furniture, a three-generation family furniture manufacturing company, stood as the cornerstone of the local economy. Thomas Winston, grandson of the founder, reigned as company chairman and was beloved by the townspeople for his gentle nature. However, at home, he typically behaved like an obedient student before his wife Margaret, a former teacher who served as president of the local women's club. Margaret was a woman of imposing dignity. Her sharp gaze and calculated smile had been cultivated through years of experience managing children as a teacher. She held absolute power in the town's women's club, and everyone followed her opinions. For her, protecting the honor and traditions of the Winston family was her most important mission. Working as Margaret's right hand was her daughter Caroline. While raising 3 children, Caroline supported her mother's women's club activities. She possessed her mother's keen observation skills and clever rhetoric, wielding considerable influence among the town's women. For Caroline, gaining her mother's approval was her life's greatest goal, and she would stop at nothing to achieve it. Meanwhile, her son James was expected to inherit the company from his father. However, he had inherited his mother's calculating nature rather than his father's gentleness. While he outwardly played the role of an honest and kind man, he actually prioritized his own interests above all else. For him, marriage was merely another means of meeting his family's expectations. 5 years ago, James met Laura Harrison in Chicago. At the time, Laura was a freelance graphic designer beginning to achieve success in the urban market. Her sophisticated taste and independent lifestyle were refreshingly appealing to James. After marriage, Laura moved to Meadowbrook. She constantly felt uncomfortable between the sensibilities she had cultivated in the city and the conservative values of the rural town. From the beginning, Margaret viewed her son's wife as a frivolous city woman and made snide remarks at every opportunity. At family gatherings, everything from Laura's clothing to her way of speaking became targets for criticism. Particularly as 3 years passed without children, Margaret's attitude became even harsher. The words, "Do you intend to end the Winston bloodline?" were repeated like an incantation. Caroline also sided with her mother, boastfully saying, "I was blessed with my eldest son within a year of marriage," further cornering Laura. While Laura outwardly played the role of a submissive daughter-in-law, she secretly recorded her in-laws' words and actions on her smartphone. She carefully accumulated audio and video evidence for when legal protection might become necessary. Even her husband James was unaware that his wife was making such preparations. Then Laura's pregnancy was confirmed. When the doctor informed her of the pregnancy, Laura had mixed feelings. Along with joy, anxiety crossed her heart as she thought about how this child might be used by the Winston family. Upon hearing the news of the pregnancy, Margaret's attitude completely changed. Her previously cold gaze magically transformed into something warm. Seeing her mother-in-law tearfully say, "Laura, you've truly become a member of our family now," Laura felt uneasy. The change was far too dramatic. Currently 7 months pregnant, Laura continued her quiet observations amid her in-laws' sudden kindness. One morning, Laura was awakened by a phone call from her mother-in-law Margaret. While she normally never called early in the morning, Margaret's behavioral patterns had clearly changed over the past few weeks. "Laura, how are you feeling?" The voice from the other end of the phone was uncharacteristically gentle and concerned for Margaret. "Would you like to go baby shopping together today? Caroline is eager to come along too." Laura gripped the receiver while gazing at the maple tree with autumn foliage outside her window. "Thank you very much." But carrying heavy things, she began to decline hesitantly, but Margaret interrupted. "Of course, we won't let you carry anything. We'll handle all the arrangements. Even for car travel, we'll prepare the most comfortable seat for you." In these 5 years, Margaret had never treated Laura with such consideration. Rather, even when Laura felt unwell during early pregnancy, she had been coldly told, "You're young, so you should be able to endure it." But now she approached her with the same care one might show when handling porcelain. That afternoon, at Meadowbrook's only shopping center, they walked through the baby goods section. Instead of speaking in her usual condescending manner, Caroline talked to Laura with the friendliness of a close friend. "Laura, how about this set of baby clothes? I used them for all 3 of my children, and the quality is really excellent. Caroline's voice had a warmth Laura had never heard before. You and I are like real sisters. I wish we could have gotten along better from the beginning. Laura smiled as she replied, thank you for choosing such lovely things. However, inwardly she was wary of this sudden change in attitude. When Caroline said a real sisters, there was a faintly unnatural ring to her voice. Margaret stopped in front of an expensive baby stroller. Let's get this one. The finest quality, befitting the Winston family heir. Her eyes were shining, but Laura sensed something calculating behind that sparkle. Thank you so much. But such an expensive item, Laura demurred, but Margaret shook her head. There's no need to hold back. You're truly family now. We may not have been kind enough to you before. But from now on, things will be different. Listening to Margaret's words, Laura felt the unease in her chest growing. The phrase, truly family, seemed to hide some condition. After returning home, Laura lay down on the sofa to rest her tired body. When James came home from work, he was pleased to see the shopping results. Mother and sister have truly accepted you as family, James said with satisfaction. I know you've had a hard time until now, but it looks like we can finally build a peaceful household. Listening to her husband's words, Laura had mixed feelings. While her in-laws' attitude had certainly improved, she couldn't understand why such a dramatic change. That night, as Laura rested in the upstairs bedroom, she heard Margaret's voice from downstairs. She seemed to be talking with her husband Thomas about something. Driven by curiosity, Laura quietly opened the door and listened carefully. Just a little more patience, Thomas. Margaret's voice was completely different from the gentle tone of the daytime. Once the baby is born, everything will proceed according to plan. But Margaret, is this really right? Laura isn't a bad girl, Thomas's voice contained hesitation. Do you think that city woman can truly blend into our family? She's been an outsider from the start. All we need is an heir. Everything else. The voices became quieter and Laura couldn't make out the rest. However, what she had heard was enough. Her mother-in-law's kindness was an act, and some plan was in motion. From the next day, Laura began observing her in-laws' behavior with meticulous attention. She kept her smartphone's recording function constantly on, recording all unnatural conversations and behaviors. While outwardly playing the role of a grateful pregnant woman, she was actually devoted to gathering evidence. A few days later, Caroline hosted a tea party for her along with other pregnant friends. The interaction with other pregnant women was enjoyable, but Caroline's occasional unnatural smiles bothered her. At the end of the tea party, Caroline called Laura aside. Laura, I want you to be happy. I really do. Caroline's eyes were filled with tears. Our family can be too harsh sometimes, but it's the flip side of love. Thank you, Caroline, Laura smiled back. However, she could no longer tell whether those tears were genuine or an act. On the weekend, the Winston family's customary family dinner was held. While Laura would normally be forced to help with cooking, this time she was treated with courtesy. Pregnant women should sit and rest. However, Laura listened carefully to the conversation between Margaret and Caroline coming from the kitchen. Things are progressing smoothly, came Margaret's voice. Yes, that girl doesn't seem to notice anything. She's really such a simple woman, Caroline replied. Everything's going according to plan. Once the baby is born, the rest will be easy. Melissa is ready too. Hearing the name Melissa, Laura's heart jumped. Melissa Carter was James's high school sweetheart who had divorced and returned to Meadowbrook a few years ago. Recently, there had been rumors about her being spotted with James around town several times. During dinner, Laura maintained her smile while paying attention to every word of the family's conversation. When she focused particularly on James's behavior, she noticed that he sometimes made gestures to hide his phone screen when checking it. That night, while James was in the shower, Laura checked his phone. It was locked, but when she entered his birthday, it opened easily. When she opened the messaging app, frequent exchanges with Melissa were displayed. Soon, Jamie. I can't wait, read the latest message, and Laura understood the truth. Her in-laws' kindness was an act to steal her baby away from her. And after that, the reunion of her husband and his former lover awaited. While placing the phone back in its original position, Laura calmly analyzed the situation. Their plan was clever, but there was one thing they hadn't factored in. Laura was a woman who had survived in the city, and she was certainly not the simple woman they thought her to be. The next morning, Margaret called again. "Laura, I've decided to throw you a surprise baby shower next weekend. We'll invite family, relatives, and many people from town for a grand celebration." After hanging up, Laura looked at herself in the mirror. Placing her hand on her belly where the baby was moving, she smiled quietly. "It's all right, we won't lose. Let me show you a real surprise." On Saturday morning, 2 weeks before her due date, Laura carefully prepared herself in front of the mirror. The baby shower planned by Margaret was to be held in the banquet hall of the Heartland Hotel, the most prestigious venue in Meadowbrook. The choice to hold it at this luxurious venue, rarely used in this town, indicated that this was an event staking the Winston family's prestige. "Laura, are you ready?" Margaret's voice came from the front door. Usually she would honk the car horn impatiently, but today her mother-in-law had come to the door to pick her up. For the past 2 weeks, her kindness had been thorough, even if it was an act. "I'm coming now," Laura said, putting her smartphone and, just in case, a small tablet she had prepared into her small handbag. As a precaution, she had backed up the evidence data to the cloud as well. Placing her hand on her belly, she whispered in her heart, "Today, everything ends." In the car, Caroline spoke to Laura from the back seat. "Today will be a special day for you. We really worked hard to prepare everything." Her voice contained excitement and a kind of tension, as if hiding something. When the car stopped at the imposing front entrance of the Heartland Hotel, the doorman politely opened the door. Laura walked slowly through the lobby, supported by her mother-in-law and sister-in-law. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor and arrived in front of the banquet hall named a Rose Room. "Close your eyes. It's a surprise," Margaret said with a smile. Laura did as she was told, closing her eyes and hearing the sound of the door opening. "Now, open them." The moment Laura slowly opened her eyes, the room's decorations came into view. However, instead of the baby shower decorations she had expected, a large banner hung at the front of the room. Written in gold letters were the words, "Farewell Party." About 60 people had gathered in the room. Winston family relatives, town dignitaries, women's club members. Everyone was staring at Laura, and a strange silence dominated the venue. At the front table, personal belongings packed in cardboard boxes were lined up, and next to them lay a stack of legal documents. Laura, her husband James, emerged from among the people. His usual gentle expression had vanished, replaced by cold, calculating eyes staring at Laura. "Your role is finished. Once the child is born, you're no longer needed." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Laura showed no sign of disturbance and quietly stared at James. Feeling the baby moving in her belly, the events of the past 5 years raced through her mind. Margaret stepped forward with a triumphant smile. "All we really wanted was an heir. A city woman like you isn't suitable for this family. I've endured you well until now." "Mother is absolutely right," Caroline continued. "We really tried our best to accept you. But it was impossible after all. Blood will tell." At that moment, a woman appeared from the room's entrance. An attractive woman with beautifully curled blonde hair, Melissa Carter. She walked confidently up to Laura. "Laura, well done," Melissa's voice was filled with false sympathy. "Jamie and I have loved each other since high school. You were, so to speak, like a surrogate mother. Thank you for your service." Whispered voices could be heard throughout the room. The townspeople, while surprised by this development, wore expressions of interest as if watching a drama. Laura looked around the room and confirmed that there wasn't a single person who would support her. "Now, Laura," Margaret pointed to the documents. "Sign the divorce papers. Of course, custody of the child will go to the father, James. We've prepared appropriate alimony for you too." Looking at the documents on the table, James's signature was already written. In the alimony section, an amount far less than Laura had expected was recorded. It was truly the minimum amount to drive away a woman who had outlived her usefulness. The atmosphere in the room was like a public execution. People waited with expectant expressions for Laura's reaction. They probably expected her to break down crying, to plead, or to show some kind of emotional response. However, Laura smiled quietly. That smile was unlike anything the Winston family had ever seen from her. It was gentle, yet hiding unfathomable strength. "I see, so that's what this was about," Laura said in a calm voice. "The questions I've had for 5 years are finally answered." She took out her smartphone from her handbag. "Well, I have a surprise of my own. Let's let everyone enjoy this too." Laura operated her smartphone and connected to the room's projector system. The technologically challenged Winston family members couldn't understand what she was doing. "Let's begin the real farewell party," Laura said, and images appeared on the room's large screen. The first thing that played was audio of Margaret and Caroline talking in the kitchen. The atmosphere in the room changed completely. The expressions of people who had been basking in superiority moments before changed to surprise and confusion. Margaret's face turned pale, and she shouted, "Stop that recording." However, Laura continued calmly operating her smartphone. Next came video footage of James and Melissa having a secret meeting in a car. The conversation, "We can get rid of Laura soon," and "I can't wait for the day I can remarry you," played with clear video. The town dignitaries in the room turned pale at the Winston family scandal. The hidden face of a family that had been respected as a regional aristocratic clan was exposed to broad daylight. "Stop it, Laura," James tried to step forward, but Laura raised her hand to stop him. "I'm not finished yet. The biggest surprise is still to come." New images appeared on the screen. It was a medical diagnosis. The document clearly stated male infertility and azoospermia, with James Winston's name listed as the patient. The room became tumultuous again. Laura stood up and placed her hand on her belly. "Everyone, this child doesn't carry a drop of Winston blood. Without my husband's knowledge, I received sperm from a sperm bank and underwent artificial insemination." Margaret shouted, "That's a lie. Show us proof," but Laura presented copies of medical records to the room. Furthermore, she presented a legal opinion from a lawyer, declaring, "Custody of a child born during marriage belongs to the legal mother, who is me, not the biological father." From the back of the room, a man stepped forward. It was Laura's attorney. Furthermore, evidence of tax evasion and fraudulent accounting by Winston Furniture Company has already been submitted to the relevant authorities. At this final bombshell statement, Thomas rose from his chair. "What exactly?" Laura smiled her final smile and said, "Goodbye, Winston family. My child and I will walk a new path in life. I will never forget this day." She walked proudly through the room toward the exit. Just before leaving the room, Laura turned around. The Winston family members were confused as if struck by an earthquake. However, her revenge drama was still only the prologue. "Everyone, please return to your seats," Laura called out to the people in the room in a gentle voice. "I still have more to show you." New images appeared on the screen. It was a scene from 3 months ago of Margaret and Caroline talking at a women's club gathering. The audio was clear, and both women's voices could be heard distinctly. "We need to think of a way to get rid of that city woman," Margaret's voice echoed through the room. "Have her give birth, then she's useless. Melissa has been waiting all along, and she's much more suitable." Caroline's voice continued, "But how do we get rid of her?" "It's simple. Be kind during pregnancy to make her let her guard down, then corner her all at once after childbirth. The reason for divorce can be incompatibility or whatever. The townspeople thought from the beginning that the city woman didn't fit in, so they'll surely take our side." The women's club members in the room were shocked that their president had been planning such a scheme. Particularly, women who had been Margaret's longtime friends looked betrayed. Margaret shouted, "Stop that recording," but Laura continued and played the next video. This time it showed James and Melissa alone together at a restaurant. "I didn't think Laura would be so submissive," James said, tilting his wine glass. Following mother's plan, let's have her sign the divorce papers right after childbirth. The alimony should be minimal. She doesn't have any work skills anyway. Melissa smiled and replied, I've been waiting all this time to build a real home with you. That woman is, so to speak, a surrogate mother. Once she's served her purpose, she should disappear quickly. Hearing this conversation, the atmosphere in the room became even heavier. The townspeople witnessed the reputation the Winston family had built as a regional elite family crumble in an instant. Laura took out her tablet and displayed new materials. Now, here comes the real surprise. The screen showed detailed financial records of Winston Furniture Company. Inflated sales figures, expense reallocations, false reports to the tax office. Evidence of 3 years of fraudulent accounting was laid out systematically. Thomas said in a trembling voice, Where did you get that? I've lived as a member of this household for 5 years. While working in the design department, I noticed many strange numbers, Laura answered calmly. At first I thought they were simple mistakes, but when I analyzed the patterns, it was clearly intentional manipulation. The chairman of the town's Chamber of Commerce, who was at the back of the room, stood up with a pale face. Winston Furniture was an important pillar of the regional economy, and if this fraud came to light, it would have a major impact on the entire town. Laura continued, This evidence has already been submitted to the IRS and the state prosecutor's office. I've also submitted evidence of unfair wage non-payment to employees to the Labor Standards Inspection Office. Caroline shouted, What do you gain from doing such things? But Laura smiled gently. Gain? My gain is that the truth becomes clear. And that this child won't need to grow up in an environment full of lies and hypocrisy. Laura placed her hand on her belly. At that moment, strong labor pains struck her. However, she continued speaking while enduring the pain. Actually, there's one more thing I need to tell you. Laura took a deep breath. Mr. James, do you remember your azoospermia diagnosis? This is from a test 2 years ago. The room became tumultuous again. James's face turned completely pale. In other words, natural pregnancy was impossible during our married life. I became pregnant through sperm bank donation, but this was my decision alone. Margaret shouted, That's illegal, but Laura's attorney stepped forward. Artificial insemination without spousal consent certainly has ethical problems. However, when the husband concealed his own infertility, the wife's actions can be legally interpreted as having self-defensive aspects, the lawyer explained while showing documents. Especially when the marriage itself was based on deception, as in this case. Laura felt another wave of labor pains but decided to drop the final bomb. And finally, I have an announcement for everyone. She operated her tablet and displayed a new document. I have been running a company called Innovative Design Solutions for 3 years. We primarily plan and sell environmentally conscious furniture, and last year's sales exceeded $5 million. Surprised voices rose from the room. Everyone was shocked by the fact that Laura wasn't just a housewife but was actually a successful businesswoman. Furthermore, a merger with a Classic Elegance company is scheduled for next month. This will create the largest furniture company in the Meadowbrook region. Classic Elegance was Winston Furniture's biggest competitor. This announcement revealed that Laura wasn't simply seeking revenge but had been strategically developing her business. Thomas muttered, Could it be that you? Yes, father-in-law. For these 5 years, while outwardly playing the role of a submissive daughter-in-law, I was actually building my own business. And as of today, I'm completely cutting ties with the Winston family. Laura felt another strong labor pain. This time the pain was unbearable. However, she was determined to maintain her dignity to the end. Everyone, thank you for your long association. This concludes the real farewell party. Laura bowed lightly to the people in the room. I'm starting a new life. And I intend to give this child a real family filled with love. Walking toward the exit, Laura turned around. The Winston family members stood dazed as if a storm had passed through. Margaret collapsed into a chair, Caroline ran crying to her mother. James stood alone, and even Melissa was keeping her distance from him. When Laura left the room, her best friend Nancy Harris was waiting in the parking lot. Nancy was one of Laura's few supporters and the only person who knew about today's plan. "Laura, are you okay?" Nancy rushed over with concern. "Labor has started," Laura replied with a wry smile. "But I did it. Everything went according to plan." The two quickly got in the car and headed to the hospital. Laura fought labor pains in the back seat while gazing at the scenery flowing past the window. She would probably never live in this town again. But that was fine. "You're really a strong woman," Nancy said while driving. "I had to be strong to survive," Laura smiled. "But the battle is over now. Now it's time to build a real family." On the way to the hospital, Laura's labor pains gradually intensified. In the back seat of Nancy's car, Laura regulated her breathing while taking one last look at Meadowbrook's townscape spread out beyond the window. "We're almost at the hospital," Nancy said encouragingly. "You really did well." When they arrived at the hospital, the obstetrics staff was already waiting. Nancy had contacted them about Laura's birth plan in advance. As she was wheeled in, Laura breathed a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, chaos continued at the Heartland Hotel. The people remaining in the room couldn't fully process what had just happened. Information had also come in that tax investigators were already heading to Winston Furniture's headquarters following the report. James hurriedly tried to rush to the hospital, but Nancy's husband Michael Harris and several friends were stationed at the hospital entrance to protect Laura. "She has a real family now," Michael stopped James. "You have no business here." At 11:32 p.m., Laura safely gave birth to a baby girl. The baby was healthy and cried with a strong voice. A genuine smile appeared on Laura's exhausted face for the first time in 5 years. "Emily," Laura called the name while holding the baby to her chest. "You were born loved. Surrounded by a real family." The hospital room was filled with friends who had supported Laura. The Harris couple, colleagues from the design office, and new business partners. Everyone watched over mother and child with heartfelt blessings. 6 months later, with the support of her friends, Laura had opened a small design office in suburban Chicago. The divorce was also officially finalized, and she was able to rent a new apartment with the alimony and proceeds from selling her company. While caring for Emily, she gradually increased her clientele and built a stable life. Meanwhile, the Winston family had completely fallen. James was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 2 years in prison. The company went bankrupt, and the trust built over many years fell to the ground. As soon as the verdict was announced, Melissa left for another wealthy man. After his release, James now makes ends meet with day labor. Margaret became the subject of town gossip and couldn't even go outside. Her chronic illness worsened, and she now lives in a suburban care facility. Her former dignity was completely lost, and almost no one comes to visit. Caroline's husband served her with divorce papers, saying he would cut ties with such a family. In the custody battle over their 3 children, she painfully felt the impact of her family's downfall. The former mansion was put up for auction, and the Winston name completely disappeared from the town. On a spring day 2 years later, Laura was playing with Emily in the park. Her 2-year-old daughter ran around energetically, brightening Laura's heart. At that moment, she noticed a man sitting alone on a park bench. It was James, haggard and aged. When he spotted Laura, he tried to stand up. "Laura," the moment he tried to call out, Laura took Emily's hand and walked away. "Mommy, who was that man?" Emily asked innocently. "Nobody," Laura replied with a smile. "Come on, let's go home. Aunt Nancy and the others are coming tonight." That evening, close friends gathered at Laura's apartment. Emily was loved by everyone, as if surrounded by many uncles and aunts. Warm laughter filled the room as they shared their meal. What is a real family? Laura thought while holding Emily on her lap. Blood relations alone don't make a family. It's the feelings of caring for and supporting each other that create true bonds. Emily looked up at Laura with sleepy eyes. "Mommy, we're happy, aren't we?" "Yes, we're very happy," Laura replied, gently stroking her daughter's head. Outside the window, Chicago's night scenery sparkled beautifully. Their new life was filled with love and hope.